G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. About 5.5 miles or 8 kilometres north of Glen on the New England Highway. And you see that double row of poplar trees down there? That's the old bridge. The road reserve runs from the fence line to the fence line, and the highway is sort of permitted to wander anywhere it wants to in between the two fence lines. You can see there's another double row of poplar trees across there wandering off into the paddock. That's where the old highway used to go over there, and then the farmer has played along with it and lined his driveway with poplar trees. Everybody was going through a phase of trying to make New England look like England. So anyway, so for the fun of it, I thought we might go and have a little bit of a look at these remaining relics of the old New England highway. And as you can see over there, we're stopped, lined up with the alignment of the old highway with its poplar trees to the left and to the right of it before reaching the farmer's double line up his driveway. And that is the old carriageway, overgrown with wattles, leading to the old bridge in this officially nameless little gully. But that little old bridge wasn't big enough and heavy enough to cope with the modern trucks. So I think sometime in the 1950s or 60s, probably 60s, this happened, with the new road parallel to the old, leaving relics of where the old road used to be. Coming over the top of the hill, with the town just barely visible over there on the other side of the valley, approaching the intersection of the Golf Links Road, with another little confluence of poplar trees showing the old road alignment. And we're now coming up to the piece de resistance, which is the S-bends 1 mile north of the post office, because the main street of Glen is in Grey Street, and this highway, the new highway, it's lined up with Church Street. And in, I think, Christmas 1964, a carload of nuns, pretty sure there was 5 of them, coming north out of town, headed for the golf club to go to the Christmas party. They forgot the S-bends were there and they rolled into the paddock, and it was crash, burn, die syndrome. So they straightened the road. So what we're doing is we're coming up to the S-bends. And you can see that big clump of, I think they're oak trees or something. They used to go all the way across where the road now does. But this is a patch of the old World War II vintage sealed highway that the Americans put in when they entered World War II in the Pacific, so that you could drive from Sydney to Brisbane up the inland route and you couldn't get bombed by the Japanese. So therefore we have pothole upon pothole upon pothole upon pothole. And I figure at some point, as there's a profusion of fairly fancy looking mansions going in along this road, at some point council is probably going to give them a new road. Therefore I've been looking forward to doing this drive before it disappears. There's the new highway running in parallel. Okay, change hands. Right, now another one of the reasons that they changed the highway was because this bridge, 1941 vintage or something, which the Americans thought was lovely, is not actually big enough for modern trucks. And in passing, what they call Highwoods used to be called Poverty Point. My father was born in that house over there. His little brother, Spencer Earl Wharton, was a bit of a joke because who would have thought that an Earl would be born at Poverty Point? Okay, so let's continue on along Grey Street, Glen Innes, the old highway. Once again, we got the poplar trees to pretend we're in England. Got to have them. And some of these houses are fairly newish, and some of them have been there for probably 60 years or so, and they've just been upgraded. Some of them might have been there for nearly 100 years. Over here, it's a sports ground now. This used to be the police paddock. I can remember when it had a fence around there, and occasionally somebody's impounded horses would be there. This irrigation warehouse was once upon a time the National Parks and Wildlife base. There we have White's Boot Factory, which was a big employer back in the 1930s. They had a contract to supply boots to the Indian Army. And we have a bit of Glen Innes' architectural flamboyance. Derelict pub. That was built for the Department of Main Roads, and it's now Enforcement Division of the New South Wales Government. That's where all your traffic fines are processed. Bow Repairs Tyre Service. I remember when that was constructed as a service station, when the highway ran up the main street. We've just come through that roundabout. That was where the road from Inverell came into town. There's the House of Follies, where all the foolish people gather on mention day to be told when to come back to be judged and sentenced. Post and Telegraph Office. Here we have the Boer War Memorial, possibly the oldest roundabout in New South Wales. It did for a while get shifted over to here, but then when roundabouts come back into fashion, they replaced it. And that up there is the road to Grafton, the Guida Highway, and this is where the centre of the town's crossroads were, at the post office. So all of the semi-trailers that evolved in the 1930s and 40s, in the 1950s were coming up here, and everybody was deeply upset at the prospect of some mother with a pram load of babies getting skittled by a big truck in the main street. So when the nuns got skittled, everybody thought it was a pretty opportune moment to shift the main street. And one of the things it did was it meant the main street got quieter. Not much was actually lost in terms of tourism, because most of the people who come to visit this place are visiting friends and relatives, VFR. You do also get travellers, and they know where they're going. Having the highway one block removed doesn't upset them at all. Glen Innes has always been pretty lucky in that we don't have the railway going up the middle of the main street like some towns do. Guyra has the railway going up the middle of the main street, and the highway moved to the other side of the railway, and they get almost no through traffic in their main street. The giant elephant turd, which I lampooned in a different video. Down the quiet end of Grey Street. So called because once upon a time there was a bullock drover named Grey who'd insisted on dragging a wagon load up this street to the sort of centre of town after a hell of a lot of rain, and he left 3-foot deep trenches. And for decades afterwards, if anybody was asking how to get somewhere, they said, well, just follow Grey's tracks and that'll get you to the centre of Glen Innes, hence Grey Street. And whoever surveyed this place surveyed it with great big wide streets, and in the 60s and 70s people used to come from, you know, Armidale, Tenterfield, Tamworth, Inverell to Glen Innes, just so that they could drive around on the wide streets at ridiculous speeds. This was before traffic calming was invented. These days they have things like this all along, and of course when the roundabouts were invented, that meant you could no longer have the 100-mile-an-hour club either here on Grey Street or up on Church Street, because if you've got a roundabout on the major intersections, you can't go south to north or north to south at 100 mile an hour, which you used to have to do if you wanted to join the club. And the idea was you started at the S-bends and you got up to 100 mile an hour, and you had to be doing 100 mile an hour back there at the corner where the RSL club was, and then you went straight through the centre of town at 100 mile an hour. And if you were still doing, you had to be still doing 100 mile an hour when you got down past where the Parks and Wildlife building was. Highly irresponsible. I never joined the Grey Street version, but I was a member of the Church Street version in about 1979 in a Datsun 120Y sports coupe. And here we have a traditional Aboriginal birthing site which got used for a caravan park. I don't know whether it was in the 1800s or what, but like the railway came to town and this was some pretty spectacular scenery, so therefore Craigie Burn became a very early caravan park. See people wave to each other in little country towns. This is Kuruma, sort of attempt to have a cultural centre and keeping centre, and it's had a bit of a checkered career. Right, so that's S-bends to the S-bends, and we're now on the highway, which goes straight through town, and when it was put in it was 6 lanes with no traffic calming, and now it's got a lot of traffic calming and people drive along it a fair bit slower. Okay, so we're into an 80 km/h zone. Aboriginal colours and Scottish themed mural. And then we have Gallery. And yeah, now you're back on the highway, headed off with the Super Strawberry over on your left hand side as you leave for strawberries and ice cream, and yes, they actually do grow them there. Old truck yard, and we have an old farm machinery display. It's all for sale. So there you go. The old highway, north to south, Glen Innes. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Been meaning to do this for a while. A couple of really, really old pre-white civilization gum trees flanking the golden pheasant. Just had to show them off before cutting the video. Ciao.